his tweets to Iran take a very different tone. On Tuesday, he wrote, "Any attack by Iran on anything American will be met with great and overwhelming force. In some areas, overwhelming will mean obliteration." How does Iran receive such threats? Well, joining me now is Iran's ambassador to the United Nations, Majid Takht Ravanchi. Whatever he says, there's a lot of rhetoric, but he's willing to cut a deal, it seems. Why not keep the possibility open?
First of all, I should say that talks and threats are mutually exclusive. You cannot start a dialogue with somebody while he or she is trying to intimidate you, is trying to frighten you, is trying to impose sanctions on you. Coercion, intimidation do not go well with dialogue. Therefore, as long as the threats are there, as long as intimidation and coercion are there, I think we do not consider any dialogue, any offer of a dialogue as a genuine and productive one.
But is it conceivable that if the threats stopped, and if the Trump administration, if Donald Trump were to say, "I will meet with Iran's president," that could happen?
This is a hypothetical question. I think the first thing that the U.S. should do is go back to the negotiating table. They left the negotiating table while the other members of the international community were talking to Iran about the nuclear issue. All of a sudden, the U.S. decided to withdraw, and the whole problem, the whole mess that we are seeing around ourselves is geared to that decision to withdraw from the nuclear deal. And you compare the situation in early 2018, before President Trump withdrew from the nuclear deal, compare it to what we have today. It's a totally different story. So all the things started with that decision. In order to make things going back to normal, that decision has to be reversed.
Until now, even though the United States withdrew from the Iran deal, Iran has adhered to that deal. Mm-hmm. This week, or in the next 10 days, you face a moment where you may violate the deal. You may, begin to go beyond the limits that were set out in the deal. Has Iran decided that it will exceed those limits?
First of all, it is not the violation of the deal. There are certain paragraphs in the deal which allow Iran to not to honor certain commitments. And what we have done is exactly based on paragraph 26 and paragraph 36 of the nuclear deal, which allow Iran, in the face of U.S. withdrawal from the nuclear deal, it allows us to cut short our commitments, certain commitments. We have identified 2 for the first phase. And in the next 10 days, if nothing happens, we will go to the second phase. And we have already announced the elements of the second phase. So our European partners with whom we are now talking, they have to hurry up because we are running out of time. That is why in the next 10 days, we have crucial negotiations and talks with our European partners in order to see that they can compensate what we have lost as a result of U.S. withdrawal from the nuclear deal.
Mr. Ambassador, pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
What do you make of this difference that Donald Trump has between North Korea and Iran?
I think that Trump's position towards Iran and North Korea are pretty similar. It's just we're at a different stage in the cycle. At the beginning, Trump was every bit as hard towards North Korea as he is right now on Iran. But as soon as the North Koreans were willing to show that they're willing to engage with him directly, suddenly he's best pals, right? Do I think he could become best pals with the Iranians if they were willing to accept him at his word in saying, "I'm prepared to engage with you with no preconditions"? He said that. I'm opening diplomacy. Obama wouldn't do that. He had Kerry meet with Foreign Minister Zarif, but Obama was unwilling to have the personal sit-down. Trump would be willing to do that. He'd be the first president that would.
To the Iranian ambassador, I did have to laugh when he said that coercion and diplomacy don't go together. Coercive diplomacy is how Iran has pursued its interests in Lebanon, in Syria, and in Iraq. So they're the experts at coercive diplomacy. Now, vis-a-vis Iran, I think that what Trump has done has created real pain and pressure on the Iranian government. We have basically choked off their oil exports, which are the primary source of income for that country. So Trump has created real leverage on Iran. For me, the question is, what does he want to do with that? And I think there's real confusion and real split in the administration. I think if Trump were to go now to our European allies and say to them, look, the Iranian nuclear deal that Obama negotiated basically imposed a ban on any kind of nuclearization weaponry on Iran for about 15 years. Let's take that to 30, or let's take that indefinitely, okay? And let's also ban any missile testing on Iran outside the radius of the Middle East. I think you can get the Europeans, the Russians, and the Chinese to sign on to that. And if we put that on the table to the Iranians, I think there would be a real fight inside Iran whether to accept that or not.
So I take Tom completely right that we've been hitting them hard. It's much harder for the Iranians to respond now because they have domestic politics. The North Koreans don't, right? But the offer that Tom suggested that could be placed on the table is still absolutely placeable on the table.
So you would advise the Iranians, say, let's meet in Geneva, Rouhani and Trump, a summit.
Since we know that this is all about Trump, the ease for the Iranians to give something that matters to Trump, the individual, and get some relief from the sanctions that are really crippling their government and forcing them to respond in ways that are dangerous for them in the region and dangerous for them internationally. They've been so reluctant to break out of this Iranian deal, even though the Americans have pulled out, and it's crippling them domestically because they're risk averse. If you're really risk averse, you need to find a way to actually take Trump up on his offer and flip him to being a friend like Kim Jong-un has much more intelligently done.
Meanwhile, the tensions, Sam, are pretty high. I mean, you're in a situation where the Iranians are really choked. They're looking for ways to exercise some leverage. There might be some miscalculation in the Persian Gulf.
Well, Iran is firing on all cylinders when it comes to their own maximum pressure campaign. In response to U.S. sanctions, in response to President Trump listing the IRGC as a foreign terrorist organization, Iran is throwing its weight around in multiple vectors. We have the conventional threat in the Gulf region, which is impacting U.S. interests, U.S. allies, and potentially U.S. personnel. We also have Iranian cyber attacks that are seeing an uptick. And we don't know what else Iran is doing with respect to covert operations potentially. So the question is whether Iran is going to continue upping the ante to try to bring us back to the negotiating table. And we can't quite compare North Korea and Iran in one important respect for each. Sure, President Trump has a despot double standard between these two countries, but Iran has the ability to activate proxies all over the region in the Middle East, which really puts U.S. personnel on the ground and U.S. allies in direct risk of Iranian ballistic missiles. So at this point, if I was President Trump, if I was advising President Trump, while I was thinking about how to get Iran to the negotiating table, I would be seriously thinking about steps I needed to take to protect American personnel in the region. We withdrew diplomats from Iraq. We have thousands of other American citizens in the region. And Iran has a demonstrated willingness, intent, and history of attacking Americans. And that would be my foremost priority right now.